Alright, so today our lesson is going to be Unit 3.1, Day 1, and this is talking about box plots, mean, median, and mode, and some of the other things that we have too as well that revolve around our data and statistics. So first of all, we want to calculate and interpret the measures of center, which are called our mean, median, and mode, and our measures of spread, which we call quartiles, range, and we want to be able to construct a box plot to represent a data set. So we're kind of going through some of these things that we have known before and then kind of making sure that we are aware of these and we can do these and utilize these without too much difficulty. So a couple of things that we're going to go through the definition and refresh the definition of mean, median, mode, range, and outliers and kind of get an idea of what those are before we move forward. So the first of all is the mean. Now, the mean is what we would consider the average of our data set. And the way that we can find the average of the data set is we're going to take all of the values and add them together and then divide by how many that you have. So in order to find the mean, add up all the numbers that you have and divide by how many that you have. Now, the median, on the other hand, our median is the middle of our data set. And so when we think about the middle, the median, it's the middle of our data set. But the one thing that we have to make sure that we do is we must have the data in order of least to greatest. Now, in some situations, you might have two medians. And so what we're going to do is we'll look at that in a little bit, but we're going to take the average of the two middles. So if there's two middles, two medians, you're going to find the average. So you basically take those two values together and kind of find the number in between. The mode, which is our next piece of information, is the number that occurs most frequently. So it's the number that appears the most in that particular data set. And it can be more than one. It doesn't have to be just one. So it can be multiple. Now, the range is simply the difference between the largest and the smallest value. And so basically what you're going to do in order to find the range is you take the largest value and you subtract the smallest value. Now, we can also call these minimum values and maximum values, but the idea of the range is the maximum minus the minimum. So we look at the difference between those two values. Now, an outlier, we're going to have two different definitions of an outlier. We'll first talk about the, just observable outlier, and then we're going to talk about a mathematical outlier later. But as far as an outlier is concerned, it's a value that is much smaller or much larger than the rest of the data. So when we're looking at the data as a whole, and we can look at the entire data, we're going to look for values that are either much smaller or much larger than the rest of the data. And typically we can find those values when we have this in order from least to greatest. So one of the first things that we're going to want to do with any data set is we're going to try to order it from smallest to largest. Okay, so given the data set, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to find these 5 different values. So as far as mean, median, mode, and range are concerned, and then potentially identify if there are any outliers from the data set. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do the median here, just because it's going to require me to put this in order. So first value would be 10, next value would be 17, and so on. Now, these don't have to be done in any particular order, but the idea is that we're still using those. Now, the median, what we can easily identify is we can start marking off from the beginning and kind of work our way towards the center by doing the same thing on either side. And so as I work my way to the middle, 20 here is the middle number. There's 4 on this side, there's 4 on that side, and so my median is equal to 20. Now I can do the same thing in a very similar way in order to find my mean. So I'm going to add up all these values right here, and then divide them by 9. And so when I do that, I get a decimal approximation of 18.78. And so the idea here is that you can see that the mean is approximately 1819. Our median is 20. Now the mode in this case is the number that occurs the most often, and we can see that there are 3 21s, and so our mode is simply going to be 21. Now the range, what we're going to do is we're going to take the largest value, or our maximum value, and subtract our smallest value, which would be what we would consider our minimum value. So we're going to take 22 and subtract 10, and that gives us 12 as our range. And then as far as our outliers are concerned, if you look at the data, 10 appears to be an outlier. Now if you think about this, all of our data is revolving around the 20s, 19, 20. You look at the median, you look at the mean, they're both around 20. 10 just kind of seems out of place, and so in this case 10 would become our outlier. So just make sure that we're looking through those and we understand the definition of mean, median, mode, range, and outliers, and just being able to find those values. The next thing that we want to look at is what we call a box plot. Now you might be familiar with this as a box and whiskers plot, but as far as a box plot is concerned, we want to know what truly makes up a box plot. And it's this thing called a 5-number summary. In this 5-number summary, there are 5 different things that we have. Q1, Q2, and Q3 are all known as what we call quartiles. And as far as a quartile is concerned, it splits the data into 4s, or groups of 4s, or quarters for that matter. And so the idea is that we're looking for 1/4 of a data. So quartile 1 would represent the first 1/4, second quartile would be the second half, or the first half, and then kind of going on in there. And we're going to look at what those look like as far as how a data set is concerned, but the quartiles are splitting us up into those different groups. As far as how those are represented on a box plot, they're as follows. And if we look at this, what we can look at is our first quartile is actually right here at the end of the box, and I'm going to label that Q1. Our second quartile basically represents half of the data, and so this is Q2, so this is going to also be what we call our median. So in our 5-number summary, our median is one of the things that comes into play. Now the last part of the box, so this very edge of the box here, represents the quartile 3. And then what we have at the end is we have our minimum value and we have our maximum value. And so those are the 5 pieces of a box plot and how they're represented. In this situation, quartile 1 is represented by the number 1.0. Quartile 2, or our median, is 2.0. And then our quartile 3 is going to be 4.0, and I can look at that based on where these values are. So somewhere in our data set we have these values that are represented, but this is just the general formula, or the general making of a box plot. You have your third quartiles that kind of make up your box area here, and then we have these whiskers that extend to the maximum and the minimum. Now the reason that we have this is that a box plot, this is what we would consider the majority of the data. So this is where all the important pieces of our data kind of happen to be. They're kind of in that middle half of the data that we're really concerned about, where the outside, so from this section right here to this section over here, we're not as concerned about. But what we're looking for is we're looking for this 5-number summary. That's how we can make a box plot, and that's how we can finish up some of the rest of these problems. So the first thing that we're going to look at is our steps to create a box plot. And as we just kind of got done talking about, first of all, that we need to find our 5-number summary. If you looked at that box plot that I previously showed you, we need to have those 5 different values in order to set up our box plot. The next thing is that we're going to set up a number line. So if you look back at that box plot again, it has a number line that's clearly defined, and we're going to use a number line in order to do that. And then we're going to draw our box based on our 5-number summary. So the pieces that make up your box, the box is made up of Q1, Q2, and Q3, and the minimum and the maximum, so minimum, maximum, give us our kind of whiskers that we would think about. And so the idea is that we're looking at those and identifying those. We're also going to label and then finish the box plot as we're going to end up doing that. So the first thing is that we're going to find our 5-number summary. Now since this involves our median and multiple medians, What we're going to identify is we need to put our data into order based on what we had before. Now this is the same data set that we were using, so I'm just going to hurry up. I'm just going to go ahead and put this in order. Now quartiles also refer to middles of the data. So another thing that we can look at is quartiles are also medians. Now we have medians of the upper half, we have medians of the lower half. So first of all, we want to try to find our true median. And so our true median here we found out was 20. And so that is our Q2. So whenever you find the median, that is your Q2. Now what we're going to look at, and we're going to look at the below the median and we're going to look at above the median. And so in this situation, I'm going to look at these four numbers and then I'm going to look at these four numbers. This is going to give me Q1 and this over here is going to give me Q3. Now the idea behind this is I need to find the median of either the upper half or the lower half. And I'm not going to include 20 in any of that. So what I'm going to look at is the middle of those middles there in a way. And so we have 17 and 18. And so Q1 is the mean of those. So whenever we find the median and we have two numbers, we go right in between them, or we find the mean of it, which is 17.5. Now the other side, we have 21 and 21 is the middle there. And so that's going to be Q3, which is 21. Our minimum value is pretty straightforward of being 10, and our maximum is 22. So the whole idea is that I'm finding Q2 first, and then I'm finding Q1 and Q3 by finding the median of the upper half and then the median of the lower half of my data. So now that I have my 5-number summary, I can start creating my box plot. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a number line. Now the number line doesn't have to be anything particular. Now I can start and stop this wherever I want to. But typically what I'm going to do is I'm going to start it at 10 and I'm going to work my way up into my maximum basically. And so I'm going to go ahead and create my number line. So there I have my number line. Now I'm going to draw my box with my 5-number summary. And so basically all I'm going to do is I'm going to draw vertical lines to represent my Q1, Q2, and Q3. So first of all I'm going to draw a vertical line at 20. So here is my Q2. And then I'm going to go to Q1, which is 17.5, which is roughly right about here. And then I'm going to go to 21, and then I'm going to draw my Q3. Now these, as I mentioned, these make the box, and so once I have these two or these three things written out, I can just simply close my box, and so now I have my box part of my plot. Now the next thing that I need to go is I need to go to my minimum and maximum. Now these are just going to be points. These are not going to be lines. And so the minimum and maximum are just going to be points on my graph, so I'm just going to draw a point at 10 and I'm going to draw a point at 22, and then I'm just going to draw lines connecting those points to my box, and there I have my box and whisker. And so here this is 10, which is my minimum, this is 22, which is my maximum, this is 17.5, this is 20, and this is 21, which represent my Q1, Q2, and my Q3. So those are basically all I need to do in order to set up a box plot. Okay, so that pretty much wraps it up for this video of looking back at our mean, median, mode, range, outliers, and then making a box plot. And we'll continue with this when we come to class.